Alrighty, well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And on the program, we are rejoined. Uh, one moment, we are rejoined by Travis Ross. Travis is a one second. Yes, Travis is a teacher that's based in Montreal, Quebec. He is the co-editor of the Canada-Haiti Information project at Canada-Haiti.ca, and he's written for publications such as Haiti Liberté, Black Agenda Report, the Canada Files, Truth Out, and Rabble.ca. And we're going to be talking about a recent two-part article he did for the Canada Files. We return to the country of Haiti, so it's our all things Latin America, all things make me want to holler about the Black diaspora, and all things Canada, since we're going to be attacking the Canadian war machine, the Canadian imperialist machine. So first off, Travis, thank you so much for coming back on the program.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Likewise, and so we're gonna be talking about Haiti, and the powers to be are still trying to do another illegal pan-European, pan whatever you want to call it, pan-Westernism assault on the country of Haiti. All of this coming on the how many years has it been since the 2004 coup against the social democratically elected president Aristide? So both of those are coming up. There's mass mobilization, of course, against it. Not as big as we would, as when it comes to the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, but. And your article is interesting because it is about current affairs, and of course, we cannot ignore anything when it comes to Haiti without going back into the past. So, talk to us about this two-part article of yours, which I just read, which was brilliant. And yeah, talk to us about that. What's going on, and how the resistance against the latest efforts of an imperial assault under a UN ban or UN peacekeeping, how is it all shaping out?
Well, in a nutshell, what the investigation revealed, with the help of Canada Files and filing an ATIP, and then doing a lot of research online, is that the Canadian government is still giving money to the RNDDH, who we could be described as a controversial so-called human rights group in Haiti, as being generous. So they're not funding them directly. They're doing it through another Canadian NGO called Avocats Sans Frontières, or Lawyers Without Borders, the Canadian chapter. And, this is problematic. I can get into what they're funding now, but if we look at past funding from the Canadian government to the RNDDH in the context of the 2004 coup, the Canadian government gave somewhere between 79,000 and 100,000. It's not totally clear, but roughly that amount, to, at the time, what they recall was the NCHR Haiti, but essentially the RNDDH. We're talking about the same people and the same director, Pierre Esperance. Then in the context of the 2004 coup, the Canadian government gave them that sum of money in order to pursue what's known as the La Syrie case. And essentially what La Syrie was, it's described in the article in a lot of detail, so I'm not going to break it down as much detail I did there. I quoted largely from Jeb Sprague's Paramilitarism in Haiti. It's a great book. But essentially what happened was paramilitaries were starting to come in to Haiti through the Dominican Republic, and were slowly taking out police stations and other bases of authority as they worked their way towards the capital. When they got to St. Marc, for which La Syrie is a neighborhood in that city, or when they got to St. Marc, sorry, they successfully pushed out the police, the pro-government forces. Then roughly a week later, the government, with the help of a local, what could be described as a neighborhood defense group or a vigilance brigade, armed citizens, working together with other civilians, successfully pushed them back out. In that time, Prime Minister Yvon Famille Lavalas, came in to observe. And the RNDDH turned those events into what they described as a massacre. In fact, they went as far as describing it as a genocide. Despite the fact that they hadn't actually done an investigation, all they did was put out a press release to condemn Evo and Neptune for helping to orchestrate the said massacre. The people did die in the fight, but for the most part, they were people armed either on the side of the gangs, of the paramilitary, or on the side of the government and the vigilance brigades who were with them. The numbers vary, but we're talking 6 to 8 people who would have died. And Pierre Esperance and what would become the RNDDH quickly tried to inflate that into much larger numbers, upwards of 50, describing it as a massacre. And but again, refused to do an investigation, just put out a press release. There are multiple investigations of the RNDDH around the time of the coup. We have National Lawyers Guild going down. We have Haiti Action Committee going down. We have the BAI and IJDH investigating and defending Evo and Neptune. We have the Quixote Center. There's a whole series of investigations that delegations that went down to investigate, and they all came to the same conclusion, which was that the RNDDH is not a human rights group, that it is totally biased against Aristide and Famille Lavalas, and that in the case where they're investigating the events in La Série, all sided with Famille Lavalas. So this was indeed government forces legitimately pushing back against paramilitaries who would come in to take over with the goal of taking out the elected officials and eventually the elected government.
Quite unbelievable. And before we talk about current affairs, what's in general, what's your reflection on the anniversary of the 2004 coup against Aristide and the I mean, I think we can call it a politicide, because virtually you had this coup against a democratically elected, popularly elected social democratic government. It gets overthrown, and the propaganda machine against Aristide, and virtually, I mean, it was basically like a war against Haitian democracy and war against the Haitian people. And the intense propaganda machine, even more intense than what we see with Iraq, even more intense than what we see, with Afghanistan, Syria. I mean, any Latin American, government, is that Aristide, of course, was supposedly this monster, and ergo, the U.S. and Canada actually were backing pro-democracy protests, and the United Nations comes to the rescue to help basket case Haiti in vanquishing themselves from a government that was led by bandits, and of course the NGOs went along with it, and flipping the script entirely, which was Aristide once upon a time was a Democrat, but now he's turning into a dictatorship. And so in general, what's your reflection on all of this, and then looking at what's going on now in Haiti, in which there's a lot of intense lobby for yet another Western intervention?
I mean, there's a lot there, but the first place my mind went listening to your questions was like a recent tweet by Kevin Pina, the director of the famous documentary that I'm going to blank on the name now.
Kill Haiti, all the bandits. Haiti, we must kill the bandits, or something.
We must kill the bandits. Thank you. Yeah. Like an amazing activist and journalist, and he was reflecting on his time working around and after the coup. And he said, having reached to watch, I'm going to paraphrase right now, but having watched a recent screening of the documentary, realizing that he in part ended up documenting the murder of an entire generation of activists, which was, a profound thought that that's how successful the campaign was. So kind of starting from there, when I look at the the campaign back then, one of the conclusions is that unfortunately, the campaign to demonize him as a dictator and the campaign to remove him from office and simultaneously remove thousands of other elected officials from office, many of whom, most of whom were family Lavalas, because it wasn't just the federal government, it wasn't just Aristide, it was elected officials all over the country, that it was successful. So despite the amazing solidarity campaigns, across North America and other parts of the world to try to unravel the propaganda for which Pierre Espanosse and the RNDDH were a key part of that propaganda campaign, in order to combat the propaganda that Aristide, who was elected with something like 92% of the popular vote, had somehow shifted into becoming some evil tyrant, was largely successful. For people who on the left are familiar with Haiti, they obviously don't believe any of this propaganda, but you can still find people today who will say I don't know much about Haiti, but I do know that Aristide was a brutal tyrant, because they're just following the mainstream media. I'll still hear comments like that. Yeah. So it's disheartening to think about it that way, but it's something we have to grasp, is that it was a successful campaign. They did successfully destroy Haitian democracy, and Haiti has never recovered since then. It's been under the boot of largely U.S. imperialism since then, with the assistance of countries like Canada and others in the core group and the UN. Yeah.
And unfortunate, and then fast forward to current affairs. This semi-NGO front group, whatever name we want to call it, is still safe to say still is doing it still is engaging in really dark propaganda for yet another United Nations intervention. Safe to say, right?
It gets a little trickier when you apply it to today, because the RNDDH and Pierre Espanosse's position has changed. It's evolved since the coup. So I'm going to go back to the coup first. The 2004 coup. They had a formal deal between NCHR Haiti and the La Tortue Boniface, we call it the regime dictatorship, where Pierre Espanosse, the RNDDH, would identify said, Lavalas bandit, and the police would go quickly pick them up and throw them in jail. It was that simple. And that's why it was as simple as all Pierre Espanosse had to do was put a press release accusing Yvon Neptune of having orchestrated a massacre, that he was thrown in jail and kept there for years. For whatever reason, I don't know what exactly the reason is, that sort of sector of the bourgeoisie that helped support, execute, make the coup happen, started to fall out of favor with Washington. That's where we see the election of the PHTK and Michel Martelly,
which ironically enough is Neo-Duvalism.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. They're Neo-Duvalists. They're gangsters. They're drug smugglers. They're just the worst of the worst. They have their own connections to oligarchs too, and they really had no interest in sort of dressing up their anti-democratic activities as something other than what it was. So when you had these forces behind the coup, many of whom some of these people are still in politics to this day, I'll take someone like Magali Komodeni, who was intimately involved with everything coming after the coup. She was elected as part of the coup government as Minister of Information and Culture, or something to that effect. And she had a front row seat in the anti-Aristide campaign. In her case, she took on demonizing and alleging crimes against Reverend Jean Just, who was like another Lavalas leader, and the person most likely to run in a future election as leader of Lavalas. She kind of led the campaign against him, accusing him of a murder that, they're allegations, but the likelihood is basically non-existent, that he was involved. And she also wrote and then co-signed a letter accusing Aristide of being a tyrant who's experiencing totalitarian drift and so on. Like, she was deeply involved in the anti-Lavalas, anti-Aristide campaign. And she's one of the spokespeople and one of the heads of the Montana coalition, the Montana core group.
Yeah.
So some of the respectability politics and the sort of like, we'll just believe the propaganda around Aristide, in order to, sorry, 1 second, I'm just gonna take a sip of water here.
No problem.
So there was a certain degree of respectability politics and sort of like typical kind of bourgeois attitude about having participated in the coup, that like, you know, like Aristide was definitely guilty of all these crimes. He was a tyrant. It's a good thing we got rid of him. Contrasting that with the PHTK and Michel Martelly, they didn't play those games. They didn't care. They were much more kind of, like you said, neo-Duvalism. They were, you know, very happy to be outright in terms of their repression and their tactics. That included attacking the human rights sector in Haiti generally. So that means attacking people like Mario Joseph, the BAI, you know, at the forefront of like human rights campaigns and defending Haitians who've been jailed illegally, and you defended Yvonne Neptune. There's just a laundry list of accomplishments that he and the BAI and also the sister organization, the IJDH, can take credit for. But the PHTK was just much less not inclined to work with someone like Pierre Esperance and start attacking him as well. Anyone who was going to criticize the government in any way, whether it was a tepid criticism regarding some policy or a full-on accusation of human rights abuses and so on, they were all going to be targeted by the PHTK and Martelly, which led to a sort of realignment in the human rights sector, where people who had originally been opponents were now working together against a kind of a common foe, like an enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of scenario.
It's crazy reading part 2 of your article. You know, it's there's a lot of different actors, and there's a lot of factionalism that seems to be going that seems to be going on between between the Haitian elites. Like, it looks like basically this idea of of this like intense amoral, apolitical gang warfare that's crippling the country. It's not really that. Corporate media wants to present it like that, and other foolish outlets, want to recycle that garbage. But from what I read, reading part 2, it looks as if like there's basically like this little that there's a ridiculous spat going on between the Haitian elites themselves, the reactionary Haitian elites themselves, all of them without a doubt, Neo-Duvalism, Duval without the family, themselves, just at each other's throats. It's a safe to so that's what's going on. But while all that is going on, Canada, the United States, and France, and their partners, in the core group in the United Nations mission, seem to want to intervene in Haiti. And when they do that, if they do that, are they basically going to be propping up Ariel Henry and that faction going on, and basically eradicate his enemies, while also eradicating yet again popular uprisings against the Ariel Henry, the Ariel Henry government, the Western-backed Ariel Henry government?
Yeah, I mean, speaking to the kind of factionalism in the elites, the same kind of factionalism I was describing still exists now. You see it right now in the so-called negotiations with CARICOM in Washington. We have a handful of political parties who have been in these shifting alliances and coalitions and informal coalitions over the past couple of years, but all sitting at the table negotiating with Washington and their proxies at CARICOM in order to establish some sort of transitional council that would lead to a transitional government. And they can't agree on anything. And yeah, the same kind of factionalism seems to exist like in Washington. Here I'm kind of echoing other analysts. There was a time where it seemed like Washington was moving towards a transition towards the Montana Accord, who, although they certainly had a broad spectrum of support and were had a lot of support from Haitian grassroots, civil society organizations, and peasants organizations, and so on. When the original document was signed and announced in August of 2021, the leadership just kind of pissed away that supports by going straight to Washington to negotiate transfer of power from Haiti directly to them, rather than kind of appealing to their base and growing their base to push Haiti out. And over time, that support was whittled down as they just kept continuing the negotiations with Washington. Washington doesn't care about popular support, so it still seemed at a certain point, I'm going to say roughly a year ago, 18 months ago, that there was going to be a transfer to the Montana Accord, or the leadership of the Montana Coalition. They had the support of ex-ambassadors. They had the support of Susan Page, who was like she led MINUJUST, the follow-up to MINISTA, writing for the Council on Foreign Relations. I'm forgetting now too, there were other official sources in government who were signaling a switch, and it never happened. So there's clearly a difference of opinion inside the US security state in terms of who's their guy, who they want in power, and the people who support Henry won out. But then he took a trip outside the country, and all of a sudden he can't get back in, and those plans are falling apart, and that's part of what we're seeing now.
Unbelievable. And is it safe to say that if this new UN peacekeeping mission led by Kenya, it's hilarious how the Kenyan High Court says that it is illegal for Kenya to basically join in yet another illegal assault on a sovereign country. But is it safe to say that if the powers that be get their way and they continue to prop up Ariel Henry and they eradicate the rival oligarchs that he's having a spat with, as well as suppress the popular demonstrations against Ariel Henry and his Western backers? We'll get to the Latin American and the Caribbean backers, though. That we'll see yet another intense, bloodbath, but it'll be presented to us in corporate media, to us in the NGO world as, order being restored in Haiti again. Or I'm curious your thoughts.
I mean, in terms of like where the propaganda would go, yeah, definitely. This multinational security support mission, usually referred to as the MSS, where that it's like UN approved, but Washington backed. So it's not a UN mission. It's just the UN is kind of given their okay. It is very much Washington going and hiring out to other countries who are willing to staff this mission. If it's deployed, then who knows what's going to happen. And the reason why things are moving so quickly in Haiti that I'm very hesitant to comment on where things are going to go. But I can say, as far as things stand right now, the Kenyan part of this MSS force was like the largest number, 1,100 police officers who were going to attend. But of those 1,100, according to the UN, only 400 have been approved. The approval process itself is unclear. I don't know what the UN standards are, but the Kenya was very, very clear what their standards are, and that you can't have, I believe what they said was, you can't have more than 2 criminal convictions in the past 2 years, perhaps 6 years. That's the standard for getting into the force. So 2 criminal convictions in the past handful of years. I can't remember if it's 2 or 6 years right now. I don't know how that jives with the UN standards for applying for their force, but it's not technically their force.
Yeah.
So how much their vetting process matters, I don't know. But they say only 400 already. And there was a recent article that said that they need, which kind of pointed the obvious, they need a place to go. And right now, there's no place to go. If they could land in the Toussaint Louverture airports, great, but where are they going to go? There's no building to house them. So part of the plan was to build a barracks right next to the airport, in part to make sure the airport's secured and not threatened by whomever, but also have them go somewhere because there's nowhere for them to go. Keeping in mind they don't speak French or Creole, so they can't just go and join in the population. They're foreigners. But as you said, Ruto, although he was told by his Supreme Court that he couldn't deploy, he said he's going to do it anyways. We don't know if this means 400 or 1,100. And then Benin also stepped in very recently and offered up 2,000 soldiers, which to me changed the game quickly too. But they can't be deployed if the airport is under control of whether it's like the G9 or some other group. So they need a way to actually get in the country. There was also a recent report for a military online magazine regarding a Marine deployment. They published a story, I think it was yesterday, saying that Marines have been deployed into Haiti, and then less than 24 hours retracted the story and said that someone had misunderstood, and they were just kind of thinking about it, but they weren't actually deploying the Marines. So that could mean anything. There could be Marines that were deployed yesterday, or it could mean they're waiting to see. And we also know that there are Green Berets, U.S. Special Forces already in Port-au-Prince, as well as their Canadian forces training Haitian police, and so on and so forth. So at the moment, they don't seem to be participating or doing anything on the streets of Port-au-Prince, but who knows whether there's operations happening by these Green Berets who have been in Haiti for at least a couple of months, or whether Marines have been deployed and are doing something undercover. Yeah, I don't know.
And that's crazy. And what makes this all the more tragic is while the blood boils against our Western capitalist governments once again assaulting Haiti, but of course once again we see bizarre partners in crime, which is left-leaning Latin American heads of states, and and of course seeing Caribbean countries, which is sort of a mixed bag between center right and center left governments also participating in this. Any reflections on the fact that once again, Brazil under Lula is participating, in assault on Haitian sovereignty, and not just Lula. I mean, I believe Mexico under AMLO also. They're great on Palestine justice and Cuba solidarity, but not on Haiti. So your reflections on that, and a follow-up question would be, how do you think we're ever how do you think we can get to a point where we shift that attitude of anti-imperialist socialist on everything except Haiti?
Yeah, exactly. That sentiment's often expressed by Dr. Jimmy Pierre, but also Kim Ives, that he's always the exception to the rule on the left in Latin America. And this recent CELAC summit, it was a perfect example of this. So, including the reporting on it, which not to attack any media, I provide the notes for the article that IT Liberté just published. I'm not aware of any other ones, but I've very much noticed in the past that there's a hesitancy to kind of dig in deep in this. So we go back to the last summit a year ago. Haiti was on a lot of people's minds. There were solidarity groups parked outside the summit, confronting leaders that came in and out. And the usual kind of platitudes about supporting a Haitian-led solution and wanting to find consensus and so on. That was all there. But if you kind of scan through right down to the paragraph number 100 and something, they were encouraging their members to go check out the plan offered by Guterres of the UN, which was at the time something between an occupying force and what we have now, this multinational security support mission. Fast forward to the summit just a little while ago, and something similar happened where there were only 2 paragraphs referencing Haiti. It wasn't discussed very much of the summit itself, but the first paragraph again repeats these platitudes of wanting a Haitian-led solution, so on and so forth. And the second paragraph says they support UN resolution. The number's going to escape me now, but it's an article at Haiti-Liberté. And when you look at the resolution, it's the resolution on the multinational security support mission. So they were tacitly endorsing UN and Washington's policy towards Haiti, which is to send in this MSS force. Very quickly, Maduro, like leader of Venezuela, just outside the conference, made it very clear that he does not support any kind of intervention or any kind, anything to the effect. I don't speak Spanish, so, but based on the translations that are available, although he said that, he didn't put that in the context of, but the declaration I just signed says this, which is the opposite of what I'm saying. And some of the governments I would expect to echo a similar sentiment to Maduro in Venezuela, Cuba, for example, or Nicaragua. Since I last checked, and it's possible they have said something since then, but since I last checked, they hadn't said anything in regards to this tacit endorsement of Washington's policy towards Haiti. And I hope they do.
Yeah.
And digging a little deeper, you find out that just a week before the summit, that Washington organized a separate summit in Brazil, more based on economics and trade, but had a little meeting on Haiti on the side. And we don't know what was discussed there. The statements were bland and lacked any content that I could cite to say lean one way or the other. But then a week later, we have the summit, the CELAC summit. We have Brazil, who is like the biggest player in that summit, and all of a sudden we're tacitly endorsing the Washington's policy towards Haiti and this MSS. So one can maybe speculate that there were conversations in the back rooms in this meeting a week ago, upwards of 2 weeks ago in Brazil, that Lula was somehow persuaded to fall in line with Washington's policy.
I don't know what would be the remix version of that. The old saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. How would you remix that with Brazil and other left-leaning heads of states in Latin America who once again are participating in this, thinking that if I just throw Haiti under the bus, Washington and Ottawa and London and Brussels and Berlin and Paris will leave me alone? Curious.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to, like, we go back to the coup, people would be surprised to find out even countries like Bolivia, led by Morales at the time, participated in MINUSTA, this like brutal occupation force. I'm not going to go into the litany of crimes, but there is a very long list of brutal crimes that they committed. Brazil claims to have only supported like engineers and so on, but it doesn't matter. They were participating in the force, and it was led by Brazil. Looking at this CELAC declaration and kind of what some countries are committed to and not, it's a very small number, like Jamaica, who've actually, and Guyana, who've offered any support for the MSS. The CELAC declaration had a tacit endorsement, but my impression is that most of these leaders, like Lula, want to wash their hands of it. Lula's never admitted the role that Brazil played in all these crimes MINUSTA committed, but also, and more broadly, that it helps install and reinforce a dictatorship following the destruction of Haitian democracy and the elimination of the murder and assassination of thousands of Lavalas supporters, militants, and leaders. He's never owned up to that. There's kind of a hope that he'd make the right decision. And like you said, it really contrasts his comments and a lot of our leaders' comments on Gaza, where they're more than willing to call out Washington's crime supporting a genocide there. But in the case of Haiti, it's sort of wash my hands and just sort of, we're just going to let them go ahead because I don't think they know what to do. A head of state can potentially withdraw support for another head of state, but they usually want to then be able to provide support for somebody else. But right now, who would you give that support to? Like you mentioned, the Haitian elites, all these political leaders can't agree on anything. All they want is a little piece of the pie to rule Haiti, whether it's through a transitional council or a transitional government. And do any of them represent Haitians? I'm skeptical any of them do. Most of these parties are single candidate parties, meaning they have a candidate that ran for president maybe in the last election. They don't, their support, if they have any, is very localized to the neighborhoods they live in. And most of those neighborhoods tend to be like sort of places, the upper middle class or upper class neighborhoods of Haiti. So they don't enjoy popular support, and the people are very skeptical of them, and rightfully so. There's a couple of exceptions. Famille Lavalasse obviously has a base of support. And Petit Dessalins, the breakaway party from Famille Lavalasse, and the leader Moise also has a base of support too. I'm not saying it's large, and by no means is it like pan-national, but you could at least say they're popular in the neighborhoods or the region that traditionally supported them, that support remains.
I think a follow-up question I have to ask is it's just so it's just so mind-baffling. But what do you think what do you think it's going to take to advance the Haiti solidarity agenda, which it seems to me as if any kind of solidarity we have in the Spanish-speaking country, anyone that needs to be mobilized in English-speaking Caribbean countries, that that I don't know. I'm pretty sure that there are very fine people on the ground that are doing everything they can to say to their heads of state, to say to any of the unions and to whatever left movement, please do not support this attack on Haiti. So I'm just curious, what do you think? What do you think needs to be done more to confront those Spanish speaking and English speaking countries in the Americas to guys like, please stop bullying Haiti, please stop this. I'm a socialist, I'm an anti-imperialist on everything except Haiti.
Yeah, I think well, at international level, international leaders can't forget that Venezuela has been consistent, and Maduro has remained stalwarts and not been fooled by the propaganda. And hopefully Cuba will get there too very soon. It's hard to believe they overlooked that paragraph in the declaration, but it's possible. They were too busy with their own matters. In terms of grassroots solidarity, my view on it is that there's a lot of disagreement over what's happening on the ground, and that solidarity movement, if you can call it a movement, is fractured.
Okay.
Very much so, and it's largely over this issue of the G9 and Jimmy Cherizier, but also it's fractured in other ways too. So if I just start here, like where I'm based in Montreal, there's two solidarity groups. There's several solidarity groups. There's two that kind of move to have actions on the streets and protests and so on. Others rely more on letter writing and that sort of thing. But if we take Debout pour Dignité, so Stand Up for Dignity, they're a church-based group. So it's hard to differentiate between their support and just the congregation themselves showing up en masse, about 200 or so people. And there's a variety of views within the congregation as reported by the media, but they were, for the most part, believe that Canada was the honest broker in this, and please Canada, can you lead some sort of force to get in there and just secure Port-au-Prince. Whereas if we shift to Solidarité Québec Haïti. There's the kind of two spokespeople leaders, Jean-Jeffrey Haïti Saintville and Jenny Lasselli, have been somewhat supportive of the Montana Accord, although I'd say like with reservations, and definitely against any form of intervention.
Yeah.
So there's already a little bit of differentiation there between those two groups. And then working kind of through the United States and so on, we have some solidarity groups that are still very much sort of famille Lavalas holdouts. So they're, I want to characterize them, but mischaracterize them, but their answer to most things is famille Lavalas, that they still support the party. And it's not my role whether to say support one party or another, but I could definitely say that within Haiti, the support for famille Lavalas as a political party has been diminished considerably over time.
Because of endless Western imperialism in Haiti, and yeah, that's one of the reasons as well.
Exactly. When you think of that tweet's comment from Kevin Pina that I mentioned when he was reflecting on having had the unfortunate task of documenting the murder of thousands of activists in a generation, they were Lavalas, family Lavalas activists. So it's maybe not a surprise that it had the effect of dampening support for the party when the militants are killed off and murdered and assassinated. And furthermore, the leadership of the party itself is very different from what it was under Aristide. These aren't like militants for the most part, and they're definitely not Aristide. Aristide may sort of support the party, but he's not part of it. He runs a university, he does that really well. But he is not involved in politics anymore and is not coming back. So right now, although Narcisse technically runs the party and has since Aristide endorsed her in 2010-11, when she took over the leadership of the party, Pasha Vorbe, part of the Vorbe family, as far as we can tell, actually runs the party. And by the party, I should say the executive, because there's no elected MPs anymore, there's no government. It's unclear how much support there is in the population for the political party itself, as led by Pasha Vorbe. And when you look at the handful of famille Lavalas MPs who were elected in the last election, it's very clear that the quality of the MPs changed dramatically. So we go from pro-democracy, social democratic to socialist militants in famille Lavalas to, by the 2015 election, the next election in 17, that brought roughly 6, I might be off by 1 or 2, sham elections that didn't represent the population's will. But nonetheless, famille Lavalas decided to participate in elections that they were warned were sham elections they should drop out of. We have MPs like I mentioned in the article, like Roger Millier and Printemps Belizer, who like are one is open about his links to a gang, and the other one is almost definitely connected to a gang, and not sort of they don't seem to be gangs that you would say maybe they're being misrepresented and they're actually neighborhood defense groups and or something in between. They're just criminal gangs. So a very different kind of representative for the party. So that's where, going back to the solidarity question, and talking about the fracturing of solidarity for Haiti, there are kind of stalwart famille Lavalas outlets across North America who don't really have an answer to the kind of questions I'm asking about, like, do they still represent the same? Are they still as popular as they were? Who are the leaders? Are we only talking about Pasha Vorbe? Are there other leaders we should be talking about and should be listening to? I don't see any answers to those kinds of questions. Where you do find agreement across all these groups is that he has to go. The Western governments need to stop supporting him. But what's missing is then who to support.
Yeah,
you can say don't support this person, fair enough, but then who do we support? There's few concrete answers to that question. On the ground in Haiti right now, we have Guy Philippe, who was a key character in the 2004 coup, led paramilitary death squads against Aristide's government, who is now in Haiti, claiming to be setting up a transitional council to lead to a transitional government, working with Moise and Charles, where it's hard to find any metric again to measure the popularity of any of these politicians. But if you were to go back to the polls before the election, was the second most popular leader in Haiti at the time. We're talking 2015 now. That may have changed, but I don't have a lot of metrics to use in order to measure the popularity. And then we have a separate group of political leaders trying to form a transitional council to lead to a transitional government, all negotiating with CARICOM, a proxy of Washington. And that's where we find Pasha Vorbe and Fami Lavalas, along with other parties like the PHTK, is part of these negotiations. EDE, which is Claude Joseph, and then OPL, I'm not going to remember the whole list now, the Montana Accord is there, all fighting for a spot at this table and not able to agree seemingly on anything. And it's been reported that Washington will potentially force a deal if one cannot be made. So it's debatable whether negotiations between these political parties that are being quote unquote led by Washington and CARICOM aren't at the same time just interference by Washington and CARICOM, and that what will come out of it would be accepted by any Haitians living in Haiti. Like the small clique of elites may agree, okay, we found our combination of the balancing powers between competing groups. There's no reason to believe that then Haitians will then accept that. And that's where we are as of yesterday. Oh, like I said, things are moving quickly, and things may have changed from last night.
Yeah, I think one can only, well, not that one can only hope. I think, but it sounds like what needs to be done, and hopefully with all of these massive, protests that that are going on for Palestine. One suggestion I can give is that a lot of the really good anti-war, anti-imperialist groups, whether they're in Canada or the U.S., while doing all those demonstrations and meeting all kinds of people who are very passionate about Palestine, just give them, give them the link to your website. Give the link to your website. Be like, hey, there's another country which is also under the boot of Western imperialism, and it's being thrown under the bus by its neighbors, especially ones that should be in solidarity with it. Please join such and such a campaign to end Western imperialism in Haiti. Do you think that could be one thing to help advance Haiti justice, Haiti solidarity, even if there's disagreements on Jimmy BBQ or what should happen, but certainly a hands-off Haiti?
I mean, Quebec Solidarité kind of joined forces with the organizations protesting or demonstrating against the genocide in Israel recently, in Palestine. And the Palestinian side was massive, but based on a friend who attended, Solidarité Québec Haïti had 7 or 8 people. So while there's a connection between the causes, I think right now the kind of rift between the very small number of people who are actually organizing for Haiti or doing investigative reports like I am, that or doing journalism on Haiti, that there is so few in number and the disagreements so profound that is a very significant factor in the kind of inability to develop a solidarity, at least in North America. And I think there's like connections to be drawn between Palestine and Haiti. A couple would be sort of the left's having to deal with the question of violence. If I'm like kind of centering on a lot of Norman Finkelstein's comments around Palestine, and around Hamas and the justification for violence in terms of like resistance against a form of tyranny, that there's been a slow shift on the left to accept the fact that like Hamas may not be, you know, the ideal sort of organization, but in some ways, because of I guess religiosity, that's often what turns some people off, but that the resistance is justified in the context of what's happening in Israel and Palestine. Similarly, in Haiti, there's armed resistance. We don't have to talk about Cherizier barbecue. You can just talk about armed resistance elsewhere, whether it's Bois Calais or whether it's other forms of armed resistance like Muscadet, who is a commissioner who essentially has told gangs that his region, the Gonave, is going to be a graveyard for gang members, and he's kind of kept his word. The consequence of that is that he's very popular, and when the government at a certain point tried to remove him, and there were massive protests, thousands of people hitting the streets in support of him, he's kind of apolitical. He's not running for office. He's a commissioner, but he has no political message. He's just defending the people that he is tasked with defending, and he's doing it, and he's willing to respond to brutal violence with violence. And he's not relying on the PNH generally, because when gangsters, gang leaders, gang members are handed over, they often end up back on the streets in a very short time. Bois Calais is like comparable in the sense that it was, you know, an uprising, a popular uprising against gangs that killed hundreds of gang members, but there were like lots of local leaders there who were encouraging people to rise up, grab their machetes, and go after the gangs, realizing that they have no choice. The state has abandoned its role to protect the people. The PNH is either incapable or unwilling. I think that question is open, but I have a feeling it kind of varies regionally, because a lot of the Bois Calais movements, there were local PNH officers who were there with the people going into buildings and taking out gang members. Just like there are PNH who are working with Muscadet, where he lives, to keep gang members out. So kind of accepting that part of the reason why, at least it was a factor in Aristide's demise, was the fact that the imperialists, the oligarchs, and the elites who are working with them are brutal, vicious, murderous people who are more than willing to kill thousands of people in order to get what they want. And as much as a kind of a peaceful resistance message can sound good, especially to like some ears on the left, liberals, it didn't work. The anti-RSD campaign, the coup forces succeeded. They destroyed Haitian democracy, and it's been destroyed ever since. And so any attempt to kind of, you know, look at the group, whether it's Palestinians or elsewhere, who are in these conditions and say, I don't approve your use of violence because it doesn't appeal to my sort of sentiments about how things should look, like peaceful resistance, for example, and the fact that you're arming yourselves and defending yourselves and doing so, killing other people in a lot of cases, without going through necessarily all the steps of some sort of investigation, that condemning them, people who are doing that, is not justified. And so we have to kind of look at things differently.
Lots of poems are about here's hoping that the Haiti-Anti-imperialist movement continues to advance itself, and hopefully whatever disagreements.
Yeah. I want to add something too, because I'm aiming towards not trying to build a consensus, but sort of like acknowledging my role, the white Westerner Canadian, trying to unravel my own government's role in meddling in Haiti's affairs. That again, when we go back to 2004, when we look at these groups like the RNDDH, that they were taking money from like the NED, they were taking money from the Canadian government and so on, eventually Open Society Foundation, George Soros. And what do they do with that money? They attack Aristide, they attack Famille Lavalas, and they assist a dictatorship in taking out and assassinating, disappearing thousands of Famille Lavalas supporters and militants. That when that same organization years later, what is it doing now with that same kind of funding? It's demonizing Bois-Calais. RNDDH and FJKL were immediately skeptical, would be kind to say, of Bois-Calais. They were saying, no, we should stop doing that. And if you were going to, they had incomprehensible statements where they were saying, stop killing these gang members. What you need to do is hand them over to the PNH so they can go through the justice system, simultaneously admitting the justice system is broken, and all that will happen is they'll be put back on the streets. It's in one of my articles. I can't remember which one right now, but like I'm basically quoting verbatim. That was their solution to the population: hand them over to the police, and you know they're going to be back on the street within a matter of hours. So it's a non-solution. Muscadin was the same deal. FJKL, which is basically RNDDH 2.0, was founded by an ex-member of the RNDDH, along with a politician who is a lawyer to the oligarchs. Immediately condemned Muscadin for what he was doing, wanted him thrown in jail, wanted him taken down, despite massive popular support. So these so-called human rights groups, better understood as political organizations, which themselves represent essentially the same sector of the bourgeoisie that supported the coup of 2004. This is what they're doing with that funding. This is what they're doing with their soapbox, and this is what they're doing with their political influence. And what else are they doing? They're taking money through this program, because this is where our interview started, access to judicial services. The overall budget, which is $19 million, but it's unclear how much actually went to the RNDDH because it involves 25 partners. But it's a big budget. And considering what the RNDDH was able to do in the past with only $80,000 to $100,000, it's safe to say they got even a similar amount of money that they're successfully generating a similarly successful propaganda campaign. So what do they do with that money? In terms of reports, it funded 2 reports. One report was singularly designed to attack Jimmy Cherizier, remind the population of all the crimes of which he's been accused, mostly of by the RNDDH and the FJKL. And it came out specifically just as the G9 was being formed, which was very much a threat to Pierre Esperance and his political aspirations, and not in terms of running for office, but in terms of influencing things, because Pierre Esperance is a huge proponent of the Montana Accord. In fact, he was involved in its drafting when the Montana Accord was like literally written and signed by the original supporters. It was left in the offices of the RNDDH for other organizations to come by and sign. And since then, Pierre Esperance, writing for a liberal think tank called Just Security, continues to reiterate, no matter how unpopular Montana Accord has become amongst Haitians in Haiti, continue to advocate for it because it represents the sector of the bourgeoisie of which he is a part of. And it represents a sector of the bourgeoisie that was deeply involved in the 2004 coup, who were not looking for popular support to bring them into office in a Sri Lankan style revolution where we just stormed the palace, forced the people out, and put the new government in. It's we want Washington to approve a transfer of power from Henry back to the Montana Accord. And they're there, like I said earlier, right now they're there negotiating as one of the seats at the table, along with the PHTK and the EDE, which is Claude Joseph's party, which is not a politician prone to supporting democratic movements, and the PHTK itself, which I don't want to go off on another tangent, but the PHTK itself shouldn't be understood anymore as sort of one organization. There's sort of different factions that have broken away. And Line Balthazar, who is the president of the party itself, the person at the table right now negotiating for the PHTK, has said publicly he doesn't support Henry. That could be absolute BS and just sort of like positioning. But at the same time, the kind of Martelli faction seems to have also broken away, and they're competing and vying for power. So I don't think it's clear that the PHTK is one coherent unit anymore. But whichever faction is over there is nonetheless still PHTK. So there's still part of negotiations with Washington, which is what people should understand. That even though it may just be a faction of what the original party was, that they are one of the 5 or 6 parties who are there negotiating with Washington, and theoretically would have some influence over this transitional council and this transitional government. So again, when you look at what the RNDDH has passed was, who they targeted and so on, it is important to acknowledge that their main target now is Jimmy Sherry and the G9. So I'm not here to sort of pick and choose which leaders should be supported, but I can certainly say with confidence that the Canadian government, who is simultaneously propping up Henry, is simultaneously supporting dictatorship, because that's what Henry is, he's a dictator, and or trying to, in the background, at least support Washington's move to make sure that the transitional council leads as a council they can control, that will lead to a transitional government they can control, which will lead to elections that they can control. The same people are funding Pierre Esperance, who has no interest in democracy and who has participated in supporting coup governments, that his main target is Jimmy Sherry, and that should cause a lot of reflection, I think.
Interesting. Lots to ponder about, and I believe you have a part 3 that's coming up, and people should definitely read that. I'll close by saying that I don't know what I don't know what needs to happen, but certainly, if we can take any inspiration from Palestine solidarity, if we can take any inspiration from Palestine solidarity groups, I think, whether you're in Spain, whether you're in Germany, whether you're in France, folks need to look at what the core group is. Need to look at the United Nations mission into Haiti, what took place after the 2004 coup, and need to lobby hell their leaders, the political parties they support, their unions, and their press to report on the real truth that's going on in Haiti, and that their governments need to stop being a partner in crime to the endless imperialism. I repeat, imperialism going on in Haiti, and yeah, that's the only sort of advice I can think of, and may not happen overnight, decolonizing people's minds on Haiti, but it needs to be done, and the same thing needs to happen when it comes to the left in Bolivia, the left in Brazil, particularly those who are supportive of the Workers' Party, and I would also just suggest that those who are involved in people power movements in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba lobby harder that those heads of state convince their fellow leftists and the other heads of state to, hands off Haiti, let Haiti breathe, let Haiti make its own mistakes. They do not need a pan-European Western imperialism and us being complicit in the ongoing situation that's over there, which another United Nations mission will only light more flames on that, on that fire, right?
Yeah, and I would say to English speakers, I would pay close attention to what is coming out from the Black Agenda report. Not just because they publish my work, because they do amazing work and they really focus on Haiti. I'd say pay attention to the Center for Economic and Policy Research, the CEPR, and Jake Johnson. Follow him on Twitter because he's following the situation closely, and follow IT Liberté, who are also following the situation closely. As far as English print media, those are the 3 that I would say pay the most attention to, because they're trying their best to keep up what's happening on the ground and give us a realistic picture of what's happening on the ground in Haiti.
Well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1 with Travis Ross. Let me read out his little mini bio. We were joined this edition of 1+1 with Travis Ross, who is a teacher based in Montreal, Quebec, co-editor of the Canada-Haiti Information project, which people should check out. Offers a wide variety perspective on what's going on in Haiti and how people can be informed and get involved. He's written for the article we were talking about, this two-part article, and the third part that should be coming out, is something he published for the Canada Files. He also has work written at IT Liberté, Black Agenda Report, Truth Out, and Rabble.ca. Travis, thank you so much for taking the time to come on today. I look forward to reading part 3, and may the Haiti-Anti-imperialist project continue to advance and advance, and best of luck with everything you do, and I look forward to having you back on in the future. All right.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.